The atmosphere inside the council citadel tasted like iron and old regrets. I flexed my secondary arms behind my back, fighting the urge to pace. Before me, the elders of the Polaris Accord hovered behind their crystal podiums, their bioluminescent faces flickering with unease. "You cannot be serious," I said, my voice carrying through the dome chamber with a resonance honed by 3 decades of service. My translator implant softened the edge, but not enough to hide my disbelief. High Arbiter Vriss, whose species resembled a lattice of vines and stones, nodded gravely. "We are beyond options, Commander Sira. Earth must be involved." I clenched my jaw until my tusks ground together. After all our efforts to keep them contained? After quarantining their system for 100 cycles? The others shifted uncomfortably. They didn't answer, because the truth was unbearable. Humans were the wild card nobody wanted at the table. A flash of amber light announced an incoming transmission. The holographic dais shivered and expanded, casting a silhouette into the smoky chamber. I braced myself. The figure that materialized wore no uniform, no insignia, just a plain gray tunic, hands clasped casually behind his back. He looked utterly unremarkable. Short hair, weathered face, dark eyes that missed nothing. Yet the air in the chamber seemed to tilt around him, pulled toward his presence like metal filings to a lodestone. "This is Special Envoy Jonah Ride, United Terran Directorate," he said, with a voice like dry gravel. "You called." We answered. "Not by consensus," Vriss said stiffly. "One faction of the Accord acted unilaterally." Ride offered a thin smile. "Funny thing about emergencies. They don't always wait for consensus." I stepped forward, careful to modulate my posture into one of cautious neutrality. "Envoy Ride. Understand that Earth's intervention is sensitive. The situation is volatile. Hostages. Demands we cannot fulfill. Military engagement would escalate." "I don't believe I mentioned military engagement," he interrupted mildly. "I'm here to negotiate." Murmurs buzzed around the chamber. Negotiate? With the Zervani corsairs, pirates who believed surrender was a fate worse than extinction? Impossible. "Forgive me," I said, choosing my words with diplomatic care, "but your experience may not align with the, cultural complexities involved." Ride cocked his head slightly, studying me. "Commander Sira. I'm well versed in cultural complexities. Your corsairs took a medical research station hostage. 72 civilians. 16 different species. Demands, sovereignty over the Triones cluster and 7 tons of pure arcanite. Not a negotiation. It's extortion." The frankness of his tone made my dorsal spine stiffen. "Nevertheless," I insisted, "our protocols mandate dialogue. De-escalation." Ride smiled again, and it was a cold, sharp thing. "Dialogue's just another tool, Commander. So is silence. So is fear." He tapped a device at his wrist. "I'm transmitting full situational analysis now. You'll see that Earth's been studying the corsairs for a while. Behavioral patterns, power structures, psychological profiles. We know how they think." High Arbiter Vriss glared at me. I could feel the silent accusation, "You brought this upon us." I straightened, drawing in a breath thick with old decisions and worse consequences. "Very well," I said quietly. "Proceed." The main screen bloomed into life, showing the battered silhouette of the Zervani flagship, Bloodwake, anchored above the frozen moon of Relas Prime. Red warning sigils pulsed along its hull. The hostages, crammed into cargo holds. The corsair leader, Vrak Tner, a hulking mass of armored flesh and cybernetics, snarling into a captured communications array. Ride studied the feed for a long moment. Then he leaned toward the console. "This is Jonah Ride, United Terran Directorate. Vrak Tner. You have 12 minutes to release every hostage unharmed." The Corsair leader's response was a hoarse bark of laughter, booming across the speakers. "Little human," Vrak sneered. "We will carve your bones into instruments." Ride's eyes never wavered from the screen. "I doubt that. You see, while you've been grandstanding, we've been busy." He tapped a button. An auxiliary screen flickered on, showing a series of explosions, pinpoint, surgical, detonating along the outer hull of the Bloodwake. Small black devices had latched onto critical systems. Airlock seals ruptured. Engines vented plasma. The Corsair bridge descended into chaos. "You don't understand humans yet, Vrak," Ride said quietly, as klaxons blared in the background. "We don't attack to wound. We don't posture. When we move, it's to finish." The Corsair leader screamed something unintelligible. Then the transmission cut. Silence fell in the council chamber, broken only by the soft hum of filtration systems. I stared at the human envoy, this unremarkable figure who had, without raising his voice, crippled one of the deadliest raider fleets in our quadrant. "You endangered the hostages," I said hoarsely. Ride shook his head. "No, Commander. I made surrender their only option." My secondary hearts pounded against my ribs. I saw the trap now, saw how Earth had used our own rules against us. Not by disobeying them, but by reinterpreting them with ruthless precision. High Arbiter Vriss slumped slightly in his cradle of vines. What is it you want, Envoy Ride?" Ride met his gaze without flinching. "Recognition. Partnership. Respect. Earth's tired of being the galaxy's side project." "And if we refuse?" I asked softly. Ride's smile returned, razor thin. "Then we'll do what we've always done." "And what is that?" He turned, already walking toward the exit. His voice floated back like smoke. "We survive." The council chamber emptied in a slow, shuffling exodus, leaving only the scent of ozone and the taste of raw nerves behind. I lingered, staring at the fading holographic afterimage of the Bloodwake tearing itself apart. Jonah Ride waited near the exit, hands tucked behind his back, the very picture of unhurried patience. I caught up with him just before he left the chamber. "You've made enemies today," I said quietly. He didn't look at me. It was inevitable. Better they reveal themselves now than later. "You could have started a war." Ride finally turned, his gaze unflinching. "You misunderstand, Commander. We're already in one. You've just been pretending it's a series of misunderstandings." Before I could reply, my communicator chirped, sharp and urgent. I stepped aside, accepting the call. "Commander Sira," came the voice of Captain Loro from the orbital patrol fleet. "Unidentified vessels have entered the outer defense perimeter." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Zervani reinforcements?" A pause. Then Loro said, "Negative. New contacts. Configuration, unknown. Advancing at high subliminal speeds. Not responding to hails." Jonah Ride was watching me now, calmly, as if he already knew. I ended the transmission and faced him fully. "Explain." Ride's face remained neutral, but there was something ancient and tired in his eyes. Earth anticipated that the Corsairs might not act alone. We intercepted communications weeks ago suggesting that a larger force was preparing to move under the cover of their operation. Insurance. A second blade, waiting for the first to distract you. Who? I demanded. Unaligned mercenaries. Privateers. Some rogue colonies. And others. He shrugged lightly. Old debts. Ancient grudges. Some just want to watch something burn. And you brought no fleet, I accused. He smiled thinly. Didn't say that. The council chamber's far wall shimmered and flickered, revealing a live feed from orbital surveillance. Points of red light blossomed across the blackness of space, dozens of ships, some crude, others sleek and deadly, converging like a tide. The chamber doors banged open behind us, and Vriss, the High Arbiter, slithered in, flanked by 2 security officers. "You see now," he hissed, voice cracking under stress. "Your intervention has accelerated the chaos." Ride ignored him, his attention locked on the unfolding situation above. "They were coming whether we intervened or not," he said softly. "You just wouldn't have seen them in time." Vriss recoiled as if struck. "You have doomed us." "No," Ride said, and this time there was no softness in him at all. "You doomed yourselves when you believed hiding behind laws would protect you from those who don't respect them." I felt the weight of those words settle on my shoulders. Around us, the chamber's automated defense systems activated, distant rumbles announcing the sealing of the Citadel's blast doors. Emergency protocols rippled across the council network. Jonah Ride stepped forward and tapped his communicator once. A single coded pulse, short and sharp. At first, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the stars blinked. New contacts flared into existence behind the invaders. Hundreds of them. Angular ships with gleaming hulls and particle fields that shimmered like oil on water. Sleek, deadly forms built for speed and endurance. Earth's fleet. Vriss made a strangled sound. "You lied." Ride's gaze didn't waver. I omitted. A second pulse from his communicator, and the human ships began to move. No formation. No parade of might. Just swift, efficient violence, like scalpels carving through diseased flesh. Flashes of light erupted across the view, kinetic slugs, pulse beams, microsabotage drones. The first wave of mercenary ships died before they realized they'd been engaged. I watched, breathless, as Earth's fleet operated with a precision I'd never witnessed outside of theoretical war games. No grand speeches. No warnings. Just action. "They're not giving them a chance to retreat," I murmured. "Because they won't," Ride said. "You still believe in surrender protocols. We believe in ending threats before they multiply." The feed zoomed in automatically, following a sleek black vessel the size of a corvette weaving through enemy formations. Its hull shifted colors to match the void itself, an optical camouflage I had only heard of in rumors. It danced between fire arcs, planting disruption mines and cutting escape routes with cold efficiency. In 20 minutes, the battle was over. The mercenaries who survived fled into the outer dark, their broken ships trailing vapor and light. Earth's fleet made no pursuit. Not yet. The council chamber stood silent. Not out of reverence, out of shock. "You don't understand what you've unleashed," Vriss rasped at last. Ride finally turned to him, and in that moment, I saw the truth. Earth hadn't emerged from its long history of conflict despite its nature. It had emerged because of it. A species forged in endless struggle, refined by loss, and sharpened by necessity into something the wider galaxy wasn't ready to face. Ride spoke, his voice as steady as the slow movement of tectonic plates. "You invited us to the stars," he said. "You just never asked what kind of travelers we are." In the silence that followed, a new sound emerged, faint but growing. Applause. Not from the council. From the humans who had entered the chamber without any of us noticing. A half-dozen Terran officers stood along the walls, hands meeting in that sharp, rhythmic gesture of Earth approval. Their uniforms were dark, understated, almost blending into the misty gloom, save for the glint of polished metals at their collars. One stepped forward. A woman, taller than Ride, with cropped black hair and a bearing that spoke of iron discipline. "Admiral Cara Mendez," she said, bowing slightly, the kind of bow designed to acknowledge tradition without submitting to it. "Commander of the 7th Fleet." High Arbiter Vriss recoiled as if burned. "You dare bring armed forces onto Sovereign Council ground?" "No weapons here," Mendez said easily, spreading her hands to show empty palms. Only witnesses. Witnesses to what? I found myself asking, my voice low and wary. Mendez smiled. Not a pleasant smile. A knife-edged smile. The changing of the guard. Before Vriss could erupt again, Jonah Ride raised a hand. We're not here to conquer you, he said. We're here to offer you something your ancestors dreamed of and your governments have forgotten. On the main screen, the holographic projection shifted, not back to the battlefield, but to something stranger. Diagrams. Data streams. Architectural schematics. At first, I couldn't comprehend them. Then, with a shock that left my secondary heart stuttering, I understood. Starforts. Defensive grids. Energy lattice barriers capable of withstanding direct singularity impacts. It was a plan. A defensive architecture on a galactic scale. You want to build this? I whispered. Ride nodded. Already begun, in places you haven't thought to look. Vriss hissed, his tendrils writhing. Why? What do you gain? Mendez's smile faded. Survival. Yours, and ours. Because the things coming, they're worse than pirates, worse than mercenaries. Jonah Ride stepped closer to the holographic dais, his silhouette cutting a dark line through the misty light. You thought humans were unpredictable, he said quietly. But you haven't met what's out there beyond the Perseus Veil. We have. The chamber chilled perceptibly, as if some ancient shadow had passed overhead. They don't want alliances, Ride continued. They don't want treaties or trade routes. They want to strip the galaxy clean. Consume everything. Reduce every world to dead ash. A bead of water traced a slow path down one of Vriss's stone-like vines. In his species, it was the closest thing to crying. You're lying, he said hoarsely. Trying to scare us into submission. If I wanted submission, Ride said softly, the Seventh Fleet would already be holding this chamber. The lights dimmed further, and the hologram shifted once again, now showing monstrous shapes half-glimpsed through distortions of light and gravitational anomalies. No clear images, only impressions, vast, sinuous entities with hulls like liquid iron and spines of shattered starlight. They are called the Ash-Worn, Mendez said. At least, that's what our deep recon probes translated. They extinguished an entire spiral cluster in under a century. Their philosophy, Ride added, is simple. If it can fight, it must be destroyed. If it cannot, it must be consumed. No one spoke. Even Vriss seemed paralyzed, his tendrils knotted in anguish. I found my voice at last. Why warn us? Why not let them wipe us away and claim the galaxy for yourselves? Mendez met my gaze, and there was no triumph there. Only a grim, aching resolve. Because humanity finally learned something after burning its own world nearly to cinders, she said. That survival isn't enough. If we survive alone while everything else dies, we lose what makes survival worth it. Ride picked up the thread seamlessly. We've spent centuries preparing for enemies like the Ash-Worn. But we can't fight them alone. We don't want to fight them alone. The images shifted one final time, a vision of a galaxy defended by a united architecture of worlds, species, minds. An impossible dream. And yet. A stirring I hadn't felt in cycles twisted through me. A memory of ancient hopes buried under bureaucracy and fear. Ride turned slowly, facing each council member one by one. You can cling to your illusions, he said. You can hide behind old treaties and outdated laws. You can pray that diplomacy will change the nature of predation. He paused. Or you can stand. In the hush that followed, Mendez spoke one final word. Choose. The silence dragged, heavy and suffocating. High Arbiter Vriss's tendrils hung limp, his crystalline vines trembling as if weighed by the gravity of extinction itself. Around him, The other council members exchanged glances, desperate, calculating, afraid. Finally, Elder Solon of the Verthi, whose species was rumored to live in timescales longer than most civilizations, shifted her translucent wings and spoke. "If we agree," she said slowly, her voice like wind through broken glass, "what do you require of us?" Jonah Ride didn't smile. He only inclined his head. "Everything you're unwilling to give," he said. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Even I, hardened by cycles of warfare and bureaucracy, felt a chill run down my spine. "You demand servitude?" Councillor Drex of the Eldavian Enclave barked, his chitin plates clattering with outrage. "No," Ride said, voice low and sure. "We demand commitment." He stepped closer to the hologram, casting a long shadow across the glowing star maps. "You will dismantle your stagnant bureaucracies. You will end the endless subcommittees that debate while enemies sharpen their blades. You will unify, or you will die separately, picked off like embers cooling in a black wind." Vriss recoiled, wrapping his tendrils around himself like a dying vine. "And Earth will lead," he spat. Ride turned his gaze onto him, not with anger, but with the detached sorrow of a surgeon about to amputate a diseased limb. "Earth will stand," he said. "Whether you do or not." Mendez spoke then, stepping forward, her boots striking the polished obsidian floor with a measured cadence. "We offer integration," she said. "Shared technology. Shared command structures. Mutual defense." "And in return?" Councillor Drex demanded, his voice shrill. Mendez's eyes darkened. "In return," she said softly, "you survive." The council chamber descended into a low roar of private channels, desperate arguments broadcast through vibrating bioluminescent filaments and whispered over encrypted neural links. The great elder races of the galaxy, who had once looked down on Earth like a primitive, stumbling child, now found themselves cornered by simple arithmetic. Survive. Or vanish. I said nothing. I watched Ride instead. The way he stood. The way he waited. Not with arrogance. With certainty. As if he had already calculated every possible outcome. After endless moments, Elder Solon spoke again, her wings drooping. "We will submit your proposal to full council vote," she said. "Emergency session." Ride inclined his head once. "Nothing more." "And until then?" Vriss hissed. "Until then," Mendez said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "Earth will begin preparations." Without waiting for dismissal, the human officers turned as one and filed out of the chamber, leaving behind only a wake of shifting mist and hard choices. I found myself following. Outside, the council citadel's terraces overlooked the storm-racked world below, a planet of endless crimson sand and shattered cities, remnants of wars fought long before humanity ever reached the stars. Ride stood at the edge of the terrace, hands clasped behind his back, watching the approaching storm. I joined him in silence. "You planned this," I said after a long time. He didn't deny it. "We adapted," he corrected. I considered that. Earth had been underestimated for so long, it had become their greatest weapon. Letting others believe they were slow, fragile, impulsive, all while building, preparing, evolving in secret. "Why show yourselves now?" I asked. Ride's eyes never left the boiling sky. "Because the Ashworn are already here," he said. My breath caught. "How many?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was almost a whisper. "Enough." We stood there together, two relics of dying orders, watching the last rays of this system's sun bleed through the clouds like a wound refusing to close. "Tell me," I said quietly. "What happens if the council refuses your proposal?" Ride finally turned to me, and for the first time, I saw it, the faintest crack in the armor. A glimpse of weariness so profound it seemed stitched into the fabric of his soul. "Then Earth will stand alone," he said. "And so will you." For however long you can. Above us, a star fell from the heavens, a flare of light against the darkening sky. But I had seen enough battlefield reports to recognize what it really was. A ship. Falling. Burning. The war had already begun. The emergency session convened under the crackling sky. Inside the grand convocation hall, the air was thick with charged ions and raw fear. Every species of the Accord was represented, but the usual pomp, the ceremonial greetings, the endless procedural debates, had evaporated. They knew time was bleeding out faster than they could patch the wounds. I sat in my appointed place, sensors calibrated to track every nuance of sound and vibration. Around me, the ancient races whispered and argued across encrypted lines, their voices sharp and brittle like glass about to shatter. At the center of the chamber, projected 20 meters high, stood two images, the proposed Alliance defense grid, and the silhouette of a falling world, marked with the ash-worn symbol, a jagged spiral, endlessly devouring itself. High Arbiter Vriss hovered into the speaking platform, his form shaking visibly. "We convene not by choice," he rasped, his tendrils trembling, "but by necessity." The council murmured grim assent. "Our choices are stark," Vriss continued. "We submit to Terran leadership, or we scatter into oblivion." He turned, his luminous eyes finding Jonah Ride standing alone at the chamber's periphery, his gray tunic stark against the shifting holograms. "They offer salvation at the price of sovereignty." A wave of angry vibrations pulsed through the assembly. "And yet," Vriss's voice cracked, so quietly I almost missed it, "we cannot deny the reality before us." One by one, the elder species cast their votes, crystalline clicks, neural pulses, pheromonal signatures feeding into the hall's ancient voting nexus. I clenched my secondary fists behind my back, waiting. Waiting to see if the galaxy would choose to live. The results illuminated the central pillar. Accept Earth's proposal, 73%. Reject, 24%. Abstain, 3%. It was enough. Barely. The council had spoken. Earth would lead. The decree was signed, sealed, and transmitted in a span of heartbeats. The echoes of that decision would ripple outward, changing the face of every world that had once thought itself beyond the reach of humanity's stubborn, savage hope. Ride moved at last, striding to the center of the chamber. No triumph blazed in his eyes. No satisfaction. Only grim determination. "You've chosen survival," he said simply. "It will cost you more than you know. But it will be worth it." 1,000 private networks buzzed with distrust, suspicion, and last-minute regrets. It didn't matter now. We had chosen our path. But even as Ride spoke, I noticed something strange. Behind him, on a private human channel encrypted beyond anything I could decipher, Admiral Mendez was transmitting data to a destination I couldn't identify. A new feed blinked into existence, briefly flashing the schematic of an unknown structure deep within uncharted sectors, something vast, something alive with energy signatures that made my translator stutter. And for the first time, I understood. This was not Earth's first war against the Ash-Worn. They had fought already. And not just fought, survived. Alone. Silent. Preparing. Humanity hadn't come to the galactic stage seeking allies because they were desperate. They came because they were finally ready to share the burden. Or perhaps because the enemy had grown too large even for them to bear alone. I leaned forward, heart pounding in a rhythm older than my species' recorded history. "Commander Sira," Ride said, his voice cutting across my thoughts. I stood instinctively, meeting his gaze. "There's one more thing you need to see," he said. Without waiting for permission, he extended a small device toward the council's core nexus. It interfaced with a whir of spinning crystals, and the hologram shifted again. A hidden fleet. Not Earth's. Not even built entirely by humans. A coalition of outcasts, refugees, lost colonies, a secret armada that had been gathering, hiding beyond the galactic rim for decades. Waiting. Ships patched together from a dozen species designs, welded by desperate hands and brilliant minds. Crewed by those who had seen the ash-worn firsthand, survivors of worlds already gone dark. They call themselves the Exiles, Ride said quietly. They were the first warning. And they have pledged themselves to Earth's command. A ripple of horror swept the council. You hid this from us, Elder Solon said, her wings shuddering with outrage. Ride's gaze didn't waver. You weren't ready to know. And now we are? Vriss demanded. Ride finally allowed himself a grim smile. Now you have no choice. Above us, the storm broke, not with rain, but with ash. Fine gray particulate, drifting from the burning wreckage of the first cities lost to the ash-worn advance. The war had come. And now, together or apart, we would answer it. The first blow fell not in orbit, but beneath our feet. Deep inside the council citadel, seismic alarms wailed as the structure shuddered. I stumbled, catching myself on a column of crystal, as cracks raced across the floor in chaotic spiderwebs. Ride was already moving. Internal breach, he snapped, his voice amplified through the human's private channel. Ash-worn infiltration confirmed. Through the vibrating walls, I felt it, the sickening, predatory pulse of something wrong. Something alive that should not be. Council guards spilled into the chamber, weapons half-drawn, eyes wide with panic. But it was too late. The ash-worn had sent infiltrators cloaked not in ships, but in matter itself, carbon thread organisms that dissolved their physical forms and traveled like whispers through the infrastructure of the ancient city. The first wave erupted into view, half-formed nightmares of flesh and broken physics, slithering across the shattered floor on limbs that shifted and reformed as they moved. I drew my sidearm instinctively, knowing it was useless. Energy blasts from the council guards flashed against the creatures, harmless as raindrops striking stone. The ash-worn fed on energy. They had come for us, prepared. For a heartbeat, I thought this would be the end. That our alliance would collapse before it even began. Then Ride gave the order. A sharp signal, coded, embedded into the very frequencies of the Citadel's emergency network. From hidden compartments throughout the chamber, Terran weapons deployed, not the pulse rifles or magnetic hammers I had seen in diplomatic parades, but something older, deadlier. Compressed sonic accelerators, tuned not to destroy, but to shatter the molecular cohesion of ash-worn constructs. The first burst sounded like the ripping of reality itself. The nearest infiltrators convulsed, their shapes collapsing into pools of steaming, blackened residue. Across the council chamber, humans moved with terrifying precision, small teams flowing into position, cutting the enemy apart with methodical efficiency. It wasn't war. It was surgery. Jonah Ride dropped a fallen ash-worn tendril with a casual snap of a modified kinetic baton. His gray tunic was soaked with particulate mist, but he barely seemed to notice. Admiral Mendez led a second unit, sealing breaches, directing the surviving council guards with terse, sharp commands. And all I could do was follow, half a step behind, struggling to process the impossible. Humanity hadn't just prepared for the ash-worn. They had studied them. Dissected them. Understood them. In less than 7 minutes, the incursion was contained. Not without cost, dozens of guards lay still, their bodies marked by wounds no med unit could heal. But the council itself stood. Alive. Ride stood over the central breach, watching the last of the ash-worn matter dissolve into inert dust. He turned toward me, his face grim. This was only the beginning, he said. They know now that Earth stands with the Accord. He wiped blood, not his own, from the sleeve of his tunic. They'll come faster next time. Harder. I looked around the wreckage of the once pristine chamber, at the stunned survivors, the crackling debris, the stench of charred air. We aren't ready, I said, the words dragged from the pit of my chest. Ride didn't deny it. No one ever is, he said. But we fight anyway. Outside the shattered windows, the crimson storm still raged, and far beyond it, in the cold dark between stars, a hungering shadow gathered. And now, for better or worse, humanity had thrown open the gates. There was no turning back. 3 cycles passed. 3 cycles of frantic building, desperate alliances, and silent prayers to gods no longer believed in. The shattered council chamber was abandoned now, a relic swallowed by the crimson sands of the dying world. We had moved operations to orbit, into hastily assembled command stations bristling with human technology and grim determination. Above us, the first lattice of Earth's defense network pulsed into life, massive relay stations anchored at Lagrange points, linked by beams of invisible force that could shear apart anything that dared breach them. We called it the bulwark. The Ashworn called it a challenge. They came again, as Ride had promised. Not infiltrators this time, but an armada. 1,000 ships of living metal, each one a cancerous nightmare shaped by physics we barely understood. And they came not for diplomacy, not for negotiation. They came to erase. I stood on the bridge of the combined fleet's flagship, an old Polaris dreadnought retrofitted with Earth's brutalist modifications, as the ash-worn tide descended. Jonah Ride stood at the forward viewport, hands clasped behind his back, watching. Waiting. "You aren't afraid," I said. It wasn't a question. Ride's face was still, almost serene. "Of course I am," he said. "Fear is useful. Fear sharpens the mind." He turned, studying me with eyes that seemed older than the stars beyond. "But surrender," he said, "is not." The first impact shuddered through the hull, not a weapon strike, but a distortion wave, trying to tear our cohesion apart at the quantum level. Earth's new shield matrices held. Barely. Across the command deck, officers of a dozen species worked side by side, following protocols designed in human war rooms and galactic think tanks alike. The enemy ships darkened the stars, blotting out constellations that had watched over us for eons. And then Ride gave the order. Engage. The battle that followed was not like the old wars. There were no grand formations, no noble charges. It was a brutal, grinding chaos, a survival knife fight in the cold vacuum of space. Earth ships darted and weaved, striking with precision and vanishing before the Ashworn could adapt. Alien cruisers unleashed barrages of particle lances, directed by Terran target acquisition algorithms. Every maneuver had been rehearsed 1,000 times. Every contingency planned. And yet, it was barely enough. The Ashworn adapted faster than anything we had ever faced. Their ships split apart and recombined mid-battle, birthing new horrors from the wreckage. One by one, our outlying formations fell, flashes of light vanishing into the endless dark. On the main display, casualty reports flickered past in brutal, relentless silence. Still we fought. Still we endured. Hours stretched into cycles. The bulwark trembled but held. And then, just as our reserves faltered, just as the Ashworn's final wave gathered strength for a killing blow, a new signature appeared on the long-range sensors. Multiple signatures. The exiles. They had come. Their ragged ships, stitched together from every fallen empire and forgotten colony, plunged into the enemy's flanks like a blade forged in exile and sharpened by hatred. For the first time, the Ashworn faltered. And in that hesitation, Ride struck. He issued a single command. A coded pulse, carried on the same hidden frequencies Earth had used to mask its rise. Across the fleet, dozens of vessels lit their drives, not to retreat, but to charge. Straight into the heart of the Ashworn formation. Suicide? No. Sacrifice. The ships detonated in synchronized patterns, their cores collapsing into localized singularities. The Ashworn ships closest to the blasts vanished, torn apart by forces no armor could resist. The tide broke. We seized the moment. Every surviving ship, human and alien alike, surged forward. We fought not to conquer, not to claim. We fought to live. And somehow, impossibly, we pushed them back. When the last ash-worn vessel dissolved into starlight, the fleet hung battered and bleeding above the broken world. Victory tasted like ash in my mouth. Too many dead. Too many stars gone dark. I found Ride standing at the shattered viewport, staring into the endless night. "You knew it would cost this much," I said. He didn't turn. "I knew it would cost more if we hesitated." He finally looked at me then, and there was no triumph in his eyes. Only the cold, merciless clarity of survival. "The galaxy thinks humanity is dangerous because we are violent," he said. "They're wrong." He gestured at the debris field, a graveyard of sacrifice and stubborn hope. "We're dangerous," he whispered, "because we endure." In the distance, the first rays of a new sun rose over the ruined horizon, scattering light across the wreckage. Not a dawn of peace, but a dawn of survival. For now. And we would take it. Because after all we had lost, all we had sacrificed, one truth remained stronger than fear, stronger than the ash-worn, stronger than the cold indifference of the stars. We are still here. And we would never, ever leave quietly again. If you liked this sci-fi story, subscribe to the channel to not miss new stories.